I'm an attorney who's handled thousands of estates, and I did a deep dive researching the Jimi Hendrix estate, and here's my honest reaction to what I found.
Jimi Hendrix's estate has been the subject of a ton of lawsuits. In fact, this litigation goes back more than 50 years and actually still continues to this day. Before we talk about a few of these lawsuits, I need to talk about Jimi Hendrix himself, because he died way back in 1970 at the young age of just 27. Now, he died without a last will and testament, which isn't really surprising. There are a lot of 27-year-olds out there running around without wills, and so that's not hugely surprising. As an estate planning attorney, I would be surprised if this guy did have a will, not surprised that he didn't have a will. But even though he did accomplish getting a will during his lifetime, he accomplished a lot musically. In fact, as time goes on, his musical legacy only seems to grow. How revolutionary he was musically, it just becomes even more apparent as time goes on. So when he passed away, he actually didn't own that much, at least not on paper. Reports are that when Jimi Hendrix passed away at the young age of 27, he had just $20,000 in his bank account, and that was about it. It turns out that the real monetary value in Jimi Hendrix's estate was Jimi Hendrix himself. His musical legacy, his royalties, his likenesses, those were the things. Jimi himself, that's where the real value was. Jimi Hendrix died without a will, at least not a will that he made himself. But keep in mind, as an estate attorney, we have a little saying in our office, and that basically goes like this: if you don't make your own will, the government will make one for you. And that's what happened here. The government's will for Jimi Hendrix basically said that everything that Jimi Hendrix had when he died would go to his father, James Al Hendrix. And James Al Hendrix goes by Al Hendrix. In some ways, it's sad that the government's default will for Jimi Hendrix has everything going to his dad, Al Hendrix, because the reports are that when Jimi passed away, he was not close with his father, Al. He was actually closest with his brother, Leon. Many people speculate that if Jimi had done a will, he wouldn't have given anything to his dad, Al. He probably would have given everything to his bro, Leon. But since he died without a written will, the politicians have decided his dad gets it all. Quick side note here. You might hope that when Al later passed away, he would give a large portion of his estate to his other son, Leon, which is probably what Jimi would have wanted, but nope, that's not what happened. Al actually totally cut out Leon, and instead, Al's will gives everything to his stepdaughter, Janie. And that saddens some people because it's very unlikely that Jimi would have wanted all of his likenesses and musical royalties and things like that to end up with Janie Hendrix, who was his stepsister, who he probably only met once or twice for a few minutes. Janie was only 8 or 9 years old when Jimi Hendrix passed away, so it's not like he had a close relationship with this Janie. And while we're talking about the Al Hendrix estate, since that ended up with all the value from Jimi Hendrix's estate, you should note that Jimi Hendrix spent millions of dollars defending the Al Hendrix estate plan against challenges by Leon Hendrix.
Millions of dollars.
But before we get into 2002, which is when Al passed away, I think we should first talk about 1980s and 1990s when Al Hendrix was in charge of all of the Jimi Hendrix musical royalties and likenesses and things like that. See, shortly after Jimi Hendrix died, Al basically allowed Leo Branton, who was an estate lawyer, to take control of the Jimi Hendrix estate. In 1974, on Branton's advice, Al Hendrix actually signed over Jimi's rights to a Panamanian company who was also represented by Branton. Let's pause there. As an estate lawyer, I can smell a conflict of interest a mile away. Here I see Leo Branton, who is allegedly representing Al Hendrix as it relates to the Jimi Hendrix musical royalty and things like that. But at the same time, in the same transaction, he's representing the other side in those negotiations. That's a huge red flag. That's a massive conflict of interest. How can he represent both sides to the same deal to make sure that both sides are getting the best deal possible? Well, that's a trick question. You can't possibly. And that's the nature of a conflict of interest. Here, Leo Branton should not have represented both sides. He should have chosen one side or the other and picked the pony and stuck with it. But I digress. He decided to represent both sides in this massive conflict of interest, and not shockingly, it ended up in litigation. So after that original Leo Branton deal, the musical rights and royalties bounce around to all kinds of different companies, including Interlit in the UK, Warner Brothers, and some other companies as well. But ultimately, things get exciting again when all of those companies try to sell the Jimi Hendrix rights to MCA. This was in 1993. And when this was supposed to happen, Al Hendrix was furious because up until that time, Al Hendrix was getting some royalty payments from those rights. And if they're sold to MCA, he would potentially be cut off. See, Al believed when he did this original Leo Branton deal that he actually continued to own all of the likenesses and musical rights and all of that kind of thing. He basically thought what he was selling was kind of a rental agreement, that the company who was purchasing was just sort of renting the rights to use the Jimi Hendrix material for a period of time. He didn't believe that he actually sold all of the rights. He thought of it as more like a rental agreement of those rights. So in 1993, there's some litigation against Al Hendrix and whoever might claim to own the Jimi Hendrix rights. And this caught the attention of Paul Allen, who was the Microsoft co-founder. Paul Allen wanted to help Al Hendrix. So Al Hendrix takes this court action with the financial backing of people like Paul Allen, and facing strong headwinds like that, the other side eventually settles.
You go in that courtroom and forget what's legal and do what's right.
We don't know the terms of that settlement. It was some undisclosed sum, but we do know as a result of that 1993 litigation, Al Hendrix did officially retake control of all the Jimi Hendrix likenesses and musical rights, etc. So that takes us from 1993, 1994, where Al Hendrix is in control of all of those musical rights of Jimi Hendrix and everything, all the way till when Al passes away in 2002. Now recall I said that Janie Hendrix was involved with litigation with Leon Hendrix, which was exciting, fiery stuff, which Janie admits she spent millions of dollars fighting, but that wasn't even the only litigation. In addition to the lawsuit between Janie and Leon about whether or not Al's estate plan was valid, there was also litigation between Janie and Leon about who really has the rights to use his Jimi Hendrix's likenesses. I mean, obviously Janie says, hey look, all of the likenesses and musical rights were in Al's name and I inherited all of that, so it all belongs to me. But Leon says, no, that's not the case. Not all of the rights to use his likenesses were in Al's estate. I also have rights to use his likenesses. So now you have this litigation between Hendrix Experience LLC, which is controlled by Janie, which was Jimmy's stepsister, who he barely even knew or might not have known at all, and then Leon, who is very close with Jimmy, and his company is HendrixLicensing.com. Now the good news is the litigation between Experience Hendrix LLC and HendrixLicensing.com recently did settle for an undisclosed amount outside of court. But Remember that I said there is still litigation going on involving Jimi Hendrix to this day. The most recent batch of litigation involves lawsuits among Jimi Hendrix's estate and then also the estates of Hendrix's bandmates, bassist Noel Redding and drummer Mitch Mitchell. See, representatives for the bandmates' estates claim that they're entitled to expanded copyright claims. They claim that they're entitled to a share of royalties for the 3 billion streams of Hendrix music, and those streams would be worth millions of dollars, they say. Now, this case is still going on, and it was actually 2 cases, one filed in the US and one filed in the UK. But just recently, in May of 2023, the US judge said, no, I'll let the UK judge figure this one out. We'll let them deal with it. So now that's been distilled down into one case, which is still pending in the UK. Now, despite the legal battles and the family disputes, the Jimi Hendrix estate continues to generate substantial revenue from Jimi's music. His albums continue to sell millions of copies worldwide, and his songs are frequently covered by artists. Now, it's interesting to note that Jimi Hendrix has sold hundreds of thousands of albums and other merchandise after he died. It seems like he's actually getting more famous after he passed away. Sales from his music and albums continue to this day, and revenue earned by the Hendrix estate appears to be increasing. The estate has been successful in licensing Jimi's music for use in films, TV shows, and even video games. In fact, in 2013, Experience Hendrix LLC signed a multi-year deal with Sony Music Entertainment for the worldwide distribution of Jimi Hendrix recordings. So this continues on, and this is what makes this Jimi Hendrix estate so interesting. A lot of times when I review celebrity estate plans, yeah, maybe there's a lawsuit involving a couple of relatives, and those settle outside of court maybe within a year or two of that celebrity's passing, but very rarely as an attorney do I see 53 years worth of lawsuits involving an estate, even a celebrity's estate. And this is really what makes the Jimi Hendrix estate so unique. It's that 53 years after he passed away, his estate is more valuable than ever, and that's why people are willing to litigate and duke it out in court. I hope that someday there are no more lawsuits involving the Jimi Hendrix estate, so we can just enjoy the musical genius who was way ahead of his time.